along Interstate 35, but an intensive search didn't reveal anything. It was later concluded that Michael's body may have been eaten by wild hogs in the area. Frank Floyd was never found guilty of Sharon's murder, though popular consensus believes he is also guilty of this crime. To this day, he refuses to talk about Sharon's death. Frank is still awaiting his penalty for Cheryl's murder on death row. Our next case is no less shocking or tragic. On August 24, 1980, Grégory Villemin was born to his parents Jean-Marie and Christine Villemin. The family lived in La Panche-sur-Vaillon in eastern France, where Jean-Marie worked as a factory foreman after being promoted. The couple had just moved into a newly built home soon before welcoming their bright baby boy. By all accounts, the family was happy and successful. But then things took a startling turn. The Villemin family began receiving anonymous threatening letters and phone calls promising revenge against Jean-Marie. The letters and calls never specified what the sender wanted revenge for, only that they were seeking it. Over 4 years, the threats continued and expanded to include Jean-Marie's parents as well. Then, on October 16, 1984, while playing in the garden, 4-year-old Grégory disappeared. Christine quickly noticed that her son wasn't on the front yard anymore and called the police. As the police began their search, Christine drove around the nearby small village in a panic. No trace of the 4-year-old could be found. As the search continued, Grégory's uncle received an anonymous phone call that stated, "I've kidnapped the boy. I've strangled him and I've thrown him in the river Vaillon. I have my revenge." The next day, before anything could be further explored, Jean-Marie found a letter that appeared to be posted to them at the time Grégory was taken. It read, "I hope you die of grief, boss. Your money won't bring back your son. Here's my revenge, you..." Grégory's body was found later that day near Docelle in the Vaillon River, only 7 kilometers from his home. He had been drowned with his hands and feet bound and his wool hat pulled over his face. His family was absolutely devastated. The case of Grégory's murder, which horrified the French public, became known as the Affaire de Grégory. The killer was soon referred to as Le Corbeau, or the Crow, based off of a famous French film that had a similar theme to the threatening notes the family had received. After intense investigation, police had a suspect narrowed down by handwriting experts who analyzed the ominous letters and a key witness statement. In 1985, Bernard Laroche, Jean-Marie's cousin, was arrested and questioned based on a statement from his 15-year-old sister-in-law. But Laroche denied being the Crow, and soon his sister-in-law took back her statement, saying that it had been coerced. Even though Laroche was eventually cleared and freed, Jean-Marie stood in front of reporters and made a vow that he believed Laroche was guilty of murdering his son, and that he would kill him. But the case took another shocking twist on March 25, 1985, when the handwriting experts determined that Grégory's own mother, Christine, may have written the threatening letters. Only 4 days later, Jean-Marie went to Laroche's work, determined to avenge the death of his son, and not believing that his wife was guilty. There he shot and killed his own cousin as he was leaving the building. Jean-Marie was convicted of murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison. In July of the same year, Christine was charged with the murder of their son. She was pregnant with twins at the time, but went on a hunger strike to protest her innocence. For 11 days, she refused to eat, and she was eventually freed after an appeal found that she had been convicted with flimsy evidence and no real motive. However, Christine's tragedy wasn't over yet. As she was released, she collapsed and reportedly miscarried one of her babies. She wasn't officially cleared of all charges until 1993, and Jean-Marie was released from prison after serving only 2.5 years in 1987. After so much turmoil, the Villemin family was still no closer to knowing who had killed Grégory. For decades after Grégory's death, the case continued to haunt France and was reopened and re-examined with tests done to the letters, the rope used to bind him, and DNA testing on Grégory's clothing and the saliva on the stamps used to post the letters. But it was no use. All was found to be inconclusive. In 2017, the case was once again reopened, and this time there was new evidence which resulted in 3 arrests, once again shocking France. Grégory's great-aunt, great-uncle, and his aunt were taken in for questioning, along with others, including more family members. The aunt was eventually released, but the great-aunt and great-uncle refused to speak to police at all. None were convicted. A different tragedy soon struck when the magistrate, Jean-Michel Lambert, who was in charge of the first investigation, took his own life because of the pressure and criticism he faced with the case still being unsolved 33 years after Grégory's death. The why of Grégory's death has never been answered, but some cite jealousy within the Villemin family as a possible cause, and others suggest that the fact that the letters called Jean-Marie boss could mean it had to do with his work. Either way, no real evidence or suspect has been found, but almost everyone in the Villemin family has been under suspicion at some point. In December of 2020, the case was once again reopened, but this time police are determined to uncover the real identity of the Crow once and for all. New interviews have been conducted, and police are relying on a brand new technology called stylometrics, which looks at the style, syntax, punctuation, and turns of phrase used in the threatening letters to identify the killer. A new suspect has been identified, but so far has not yet been named. It appears that the murder of Grégory Villemin may soon be solved. Our next case is not a normal missing persons case and has a twist that seems too surprising to possibly be true, and yet it is. Nicholas Barclay was born December 31st, 1980, as the youngest to 2 older siblings. He had a rather normal childhood in San Antonio, Texas, but as a preteen, he started to develop a reputation as a troubled kid. Nicholas was known to have a history of fighting physically and verbally with his mother, skipping school, threatening his teachers, stealing shoes, and even breaking into a convenience store. By only 13, Nicholas had a juvenile criminal record for his antics, and allegedly 3 tattoos that his friends had given him with an unsterilized needle. At some point, Nicholas was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. His mother was reportedly so exasperated with his demanding supervision that she asked her older son Jason to come and live with her to aid in the young boy's caretaking. On June 13, 1994, Nicholas called home looking for someone to pick him up after playing basketball in his neighborhood. His older brother Jason answered the phone, but refused to wake up their mother, who had been working late nights, and instead told Nicholas to walk home. But he never arrived. Unfortunately, with Nicholas's reputation, few believed something was wrong when the 13-year-old couldn't be found. Most were inclined to believe he had run away, and he would return at some point soon. This theory was given credence by the fact that the day after he vanished, he had a court hearing to decide if he would be sent to a rehabilitation center. But still, after not returning for longer than normal, and with his mother's pleading, an investigation to find Nicholas was finally started. For months, there was no sign of him. The only clue was 3 months after Nicholas's disappearance, when Jason called the police to say that he could hear his younger brother breaking into their garage. Yet, when police arrived, there was no evidence of forced entry, nor any sign of Nicholas, but they couldn't understand why Jason would lie about such a thing. After years passed, the Barclay family started to come to terms with the fact that they may never see Nicholas again. That is, until this case took a surprising and unusual turn. Few missing children's cases end in the child being found, and yet, in 1997, 3 years after he went missing, the Barclay family was told that Nicholas had been found alive and safe. Despite this joyous news, there was something rather strange about the phone call. Nicholas was said to have been found in Linares, Spain, after having been taken by a child trafficking ring that had moved him all the way to Europe. After years of being held captive, Nicholas had managed to escape. The police told the Barclays that Nicholas had been forced to speak only French for the 3 years he was gone, and had been hurt during his time away from them. Carrie, Nicholas's older sister, flew to Spain to identify and retrieve her missing brother. Things did not go as planned, though, as Nicholas appeared afraid of his sister, especially the fact that she might not recognize him and force him to remain in Spain. When he finally allowed Carrie to come and see him, he kept a baseball hat and sunglasses on, yet Carrie said that she knew he was her brother. The two spent some time together to get reacquainted, as Nicholas claimed that he had very little recollection of his life before being taken, as his mind had blocked it out as an emotional response. When Carrie showed him family photos, Nicholas appeared to remember certain things and people, such as asking her if Grandpa was still in. Before he was allowed to return home with Carrie, though, Nicholas had to pass a test where the police showed him family photos that Carrie hadn't gone over with him, and he had to correctly identify the people in them. Nicholas only made one small mistake, and so he was allowed to return home to Texas with Carrie. Even though the Barclays were delighted to finally have Nicholas back, there were a few things that they couldn't ignore. One being the most obvious, which was the fact that their brother had been blonde with blue eyes when he was taken, but the boy who came back from Spain had dark hair and brown eyes. Nicholas had an extraordinary explanation for his change in appearance. He said that to keep his identity a secret, the people who had taken him had performed experiments to change his hair and eye color so that no one would recognize him as Nicholas. He also spoke with a heavy French accent, but this was explained away with his story of being forced to only speak French for the 3 years. The family was so relieved to finally have Nicholas home that they actively ignored some of the things authorities raised concerns about, and even told investigators to close the case. A film crew heard about the amazing story and asked to follow the Barclays around to document how Nicholas was adjusting to returning to his family. They agreed, and that was when everything started to fall apart. A local private detective was working with the crew and became increasingly suspicious of the French-speaking, dark-haired Nicholas. He began his own investigation and took a picture of Nicholas's ears to compare to earlier photos. He found that they didn't match, and as ears don't age or change, he took his concerns to the authorities. By February of 1998, after Nicholas was back living with the Barclays for 5 months, the FBI became involved when they obtained a court order to investigate. When Nicholas's fingerprints and DNA were taken, it was determined that the man the Barclays believed to be their Nicholas was actually a 23-year-old Frenchman named Frédéric Pierre Bourdon. Frédéric was a notorious con artist with over 500 different identities, and the nickname, the Chameleon. Despite this shocking revelation, the Barclays refused to believe that Frédéric wasn't Nicholas. Even when in court, Frédéric admitted to being an imposter and pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury. He was imprisoned for 6 years. Questions swirled around this revelation. Where was the real Nicholas? How had the Barclays been fooled? And why did Frédéric do it? Though this case is utterly shocking, the imposter is not the only twist. Investigators were concerned by the Barclays' behavior during the entire incident, and their willful acceptance of Frederic. Frederic himself later weighed into the controversy, saying that even he couldn't believe that the Barclays accepted him so easily, rousing even more suspicion of the family. Frederic even claimed that the Barclays knew he wasn't Nicholas, but that they had all pretended and played along with his scheme, and he couldn't understand why. He reported that when he met Carrie, she had fed him knowledge about the family, telling him who everyone was and what to remember. She had allegedly helped him pass the police's test before being allowed to go to the U.S. Frederic also said that Jason had never accepted him, nor pretended to. In fact, all he had said to Frederic upon meeting him was, "Good luck." The phone call Jason had made 3 months after Nicholas disappeared suddenly became a clue, as police said that those types of calls aren't unusual when someone has been murdered, as the murderer often attempts to make it seem like the victim may still be alive after killing them. And this is exactly what the private investigator and Frederic believe happened. He believes that the family accepted him so willingly because they had killed Nicholas, or Jason had, and were more than happy to cover it up by claiming he was the real Nicholas. Before Jason could be investigated, he died from a drug overdose. It is reported that he had long been battling a cocaine addiction. No other evidence appeared, and the case went cold. Frederic finished his jail sentence and went on continuing to steal identities across Europe. Nicholas has still never been found, but his story has inspired the popular Netflix documentary, The Imposter.